It's good to be with you this morning. If you would be getting your Bibles out, we'll be studying from there here in just a moment. We welcome you all here with us this morning. We appreciate this opportunity. I realized it had been a while since I actually brought a lesson since we've hired Tyler. It's a good thing, and it's also a good, refreshing thing to study and prepare a lesson to be presented, and I hope it's beneficial for you as it has been for me. This morning we're going to talk about the attire of a Christian and the way we dress, and are we showing Christ in our life, from our life in an outward appearance to those around us. I know that, being immodest or wearing clothing that we shouldn't have on is probably not a problem as much here, but it is a problem that we can see here in the church, even within this town, within this area, and it's becoming more and more of a problem that we need to be aware of, and not just in the world around us, but something that, with culture changes or times changing, making sure that we as a church are not going in a direction that we shouldn't be going. So, you think about it, the first thing the world sees when they view us is our actions, our dress, what we say, what we do, and what they can see. They hear our speech. They see what clothing we have on. How are we dressing? Do we stand apart? In other words, though many don't think that God tells us how to dress, He has given us a standard that we can follow, and our dress should be something that shows Christ in us, living in us. We should have an outward view of Christ in the way we dress. As Christians, we should be set apart. In 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 17, Paul tells them there to come out and be separate, and that is how we should be as well. So, thinking about that, what has God told us of our dress? There are many specific examples in the New Testament that we're going to talk about. Not many specific examples, but we are going to talk about a few there in the New Testament, talking about nakedness and shamefulness. But an actual dress code for a Christian, it's kind of hard to find, but we can go to the Old Testament. If you go over looking in Genesis chapter 3, we can look there with Adam and Eve. They're there in the garden in chapter 3, and this temptation that comes before Eve and Adam and her both, they sin. They eat of that tree they're not supposed to eat of. And we see there in verse 7, again reading, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. The Lord God called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." There in verse 7, we see they ate of this tree. It was this tree that they were not supposed to eat of. We know the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge there that they were eating of, and they ate of it, and they sinned. They were not supposed to eat of this tree, right? And they knew immediately that they were naked. And then they go and make coverings for themselves. Well, we see these coverings, they were still not sufficient. They still ran from God. In verse 10, they still felt naked. They were covering themselves. They knew they weren't sufficient. And then we come to verse 21. After God condemns them to death, they're going to be cast out of the garden. And in verse 21, also for Adam and his wife, the Lord God made tunics of skin, and God clothed them. And when you look back to this word tunics, normally tunics was kind of referred to as like the undergarments that people wore at this day and time, but they covered from the shoulders to the knees, or even all the way to the ankles in some cases, but to the knees at minimum. You go over to Exodus chapter 28. We have another example. Exodus 28. And in verse 40. Not Genesis. Go to Exodus. I stopped it the wrong way. Exodus chapter 28. So they're talking here, God's explaining to Moses about the priestly garments that they need to be putting on and wearing, and the sons of Aaron and himself of what they're going to wear. And in verse 40, for Aaron's sons you shall make tunics, and you shall make sashes for them, and you shall make hats for them, for glory and beauty. And you shall put them on Aaron your brother, and on his sons with him. You shall anoint them, consecrate them, and sanctify them, and they may minister to me as priests. And you shall make for them linen trousers to cover their nakedness, and they shall reach from the waist to the thighs. So we see another example where they're being covered. They're covering up their nakedness all the way from the waist to the thighs. We drop down a little bit further, or go over to chapter 20 actually. Go back a few chapters. In chapter 20, he's talking to them again and how they should position themselves. And this is an example, several of us, I take this kind of to heart whenever I'm wearing shorts. How do you position yourself whenever you're wearing clothing? In verse 25, and you shall make me an altar of stone, and you shall not build it to a hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it, nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. So they're just in the way we approach things, in our position, how we move our legs, how we sit down, we can expose our nakedness. And that's brought out there in Exodus. And then we see the uncovering of the thigh. If you go over to Isaiah in chapter 47. Isaiah 47, and in verse 2. And here he's talking about the judgment that's going to come upon Babylon. And Isaiah speaks there, take the millstones and grind the mill. Remove your veil, take off the skirt, uncover the thigh, pass through the rivers. Your nakedness shall be uncovered. Yes, your shame will be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not arbitrate with a man. That shame was going to be seen, that humiliation given to Babylon. And we say it comes by showing their thigh, uncovering their thigh, taking off the skirt. That nakedness will be uncovered. And we see that nakedness and shame kind of goes hand in hand together. Go over to Nahum chapter 3. In Nahum, they're in the minor prophets right before Habakkuk. Nahum chapter 3 and in verse 5. Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness, and the kingdoms your shame. You see how nakedness and shame go hand in hand there together? He's going to show them their nakedness and your shame, and the kingdoms your shame. That shame and nakedness go right there, hand in hand. Well, we get over into the New Testament. It also shows nakedness and shame going together. Go over to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3. And in verse 18, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich, and white garments that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve that you may see. That shame and nakedness, they still go hand in hand together. You go over to chapter 16, and in verse 15. Chapter 16, verse 15. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. So we see there a continuation from the Old Testament to the New Testament, all the way to the book of Revelation, that nakedness and shame go together. The New Testament also talks there in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and in verse 8, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. And here this is normally the passage we go to, and we're talking about, well, you need to dress modestly. That's what we normally say. Well, what does that mean? That word modest apparel, it actually comes from the Greek word kosmios or cosmos, and it means good behavior. And I probably said those words wrong, but good behavior, orderly arrangement, or apparel. You look at the word propriety, and these aren't words that we normally use on an everyday basis. That's why I'm putting them up here so you understand. That name literally means shamefacedness. If you have a King James version, I believe that's the word that's used there, shamefacedness. Downcast eyes, bashful. You look at the word moderation, soundness of mind, sobriety, self-control, discretion is given by that word moderation. So in other words, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 also could be written, women adorn themselves in orderly apparel with downcast eyes and self-control or discretion in how you're dressing. And we talked there, I put this verse up here, he's talking to men and women. He's sitting there talking to the men. It is therefore that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. And in that same manner also. So there's that same consistency with men and women that we need to be careful in how we dress. You go over to 1 Peter chapter 3. Going over to 1 Peter chapter 3. And in verse 1, wives likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel, but rather let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. And here we see, like I said at the beginning, that inward man, here in 1 Peter, we see that's actually more important than the outward person. That inward man. And I don't know if y'all recall, it was about a year or two ago, Tyler talked about the word modesty and how we should have a modest mindset. It's really going back to our attitude. And what's our attitude towards our dress? And that's what he's talking about. If you take 1 Timothy chapter 2 and 1 Peter chapter 3, we see this same concept here. What is our inward attitude towards our dress and towards our behavior in all things? And with that being said, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1 says that the outward adornment still has to be correct. Maybe by being submissive, that if they do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. Even those husbands that may not be Christians can be led to Christ just by their wives' actions. And we saw that was probably a common thing there at the time of Peter and Paul, that the wife may be a Christian and the man is not. And through her actions, he can be won over as well. So you think about that. Do we dress in a way that we have Christ shown? Is that inward man shown? That modest mind? That mind that has an attitude to serve God? You know, we often think of people when they're going to swim, they're going to go to the beach or swim. We often think people, well, they're taking off more clothes than they're putting on. And we see that in the world all around us. But if you actually go over to John chapter 21, we have an example. In John chapter 21, where Peter here is actually putting on clothes to jump into the water to go see Jesus. In chapter 21 and in verse 4, but when the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? They answered him and said, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast, and now they were able to draw it in because of the multitude of the fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and he plunged into the sea. And you're thinking, they've been fishing all night, and we know John and Peter here together. Peter and John, they're out fishing. Peter probably took off his outer garment while they were fishing and working. He puts it on to jump into the sea to run to see Jesus. He puts on more clothes, knowing they're going to get wet. You know, when the New Testament refers to dress, it's directed mostly, you know, when we often think about it, it's directed more towards the women. And that's oftentimes these types of sermons, they're directed towards the women. Like, you don't need to wear short shorts. You need to have modest apparel. You need to have modest dresses, and on and on and on. Well, men can also have that same benefit. And we're going to talk some more about that as well. And I think the next little part here, we often see the term, we don't need to cause one to lust. And I think that's where the next point that we normally go to, and we're talking about what we're wearing. And I think the common answer, are what others thinking really our problem? Is it really our job to control other people's thoughts? And it's not. I can't control what he's thinking of me. That's a common term I'm sure other women have maybe used. I can't control his thoughts. Maybe he should get his mind out of the gutter. That's a common term that we've heard. He needs to have better thoughts. We had a lesson back in college about having sexual purity among the men, and we talked about learning to bounce our eyes, to look around. If you see something that you're not supposed to see, look elsewhere. And that's a common tool that, even as men, yes, we need to learn to bounce our eyes. But as women, we also need to make sure we're not causing a stumbling block either. In Matthew chapter 5, and this is going to, I think, all of us, but I think oftentimes it's kind of directed more towards the men, but in Matthew chapter 5, and in verse 27, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's why we as men, we need to learn to bounce our eyes. And in the world we're living in today, that is a tool that where you walk through camp. We talked about through going through a college campus. You just look at your feet the whole time because you can't look around. And that's becoming more prevalent. If you go to any sporting event, any high school today, it's going to be probably the same, unfortunately. But should it be the same even within the church? And that's kind of the prodding rod there. We shouldn't have to have that same kind of defense brought up even at services. But unfortunately, sometimes that it might be the case. We need to be careful of what we're wearing. I'm going to talk more about that here in just a moment. When we come to services, in Romans chapter 14, and we often go here to Romans 14. There's kind of some liberalities that we're able to take here in chapter 14. In Romans chapter 14 and verse 13, we're brought up with a verse there that there may be things that's legal, but they may also cause a stumbling block for someone. Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. We don't want to cause someone to stumble. Why should we? Even if someone in the world. And yes, there may be men out there that they do have dirty minds. You can't control their thoughts, and they're going to have those thoughts no matter what. But what about us? What about we, women or men that are Christians? Are we thinking about these things? Are we causing someone to stumble? My wife asks me often whenever she's getting dressed, how does this look? And she's not asking for my actual, does it match? She knows I don't have the answer to that. She wants to know if it looks immodest. Is it too tight fitting? Is it actually going to be something that she can wear out in public? And she can tell real quick by the look on my face. Because if I have a look on my face that, kind of implies other things, she knows I can't wear that. Or I can't wear it in that way. I need to wear something else with it. She knows very quickly, just because she's been with me long enough. She knows. But if I'm thinking those things, she knows others would be. And that's where she's not trying to be a stumbling block. If we have Christ, if we're portraying Christ in our dress, then we shouldn't have to worry about what others are thinking. And that really is on them. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 10, like we said, we should be professing godliness. Are we professing godliness in our dress, in our actions, in our speech? You go over to Romans chapter 12. Maybe you're still there in Romans chapter 14. You go back a page. In chapter 12, and in verse 1, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service, that do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God? Are we presenting our bodies like a living sacrifice, holy, set apart? You know, the fashion trends of the world say shorts keep getting shorter and shorter. Are we conforming to what the world's standards are, or are we transforming? Are we being set apart and looking differently? You know, so let's make an application. What is the dress code for a Christian to be modest? What should be allowed and what should be cast out? Let's be more specific about it. You know, I tried to draw this guy to look like a man. Let's look at the upper body of a man first. You know, if he were to wear no shirt, if there was no shirt on, he's immodest. We talked about that covering. That tunic that God gave them went from the shoulders down to the knees or to the ankles. Are we covering ourselves completely? You know, wearing a muscle t-shirt, and I get, you know, you might have a sleeveless shirt on, but some muscle t-shirts cut way down to where whenever you're actually lifting weights, you can see through those shirts, showing your nakedness. You talk about tight shirts, and I'm not one to wear I'm not a fan of tight shirts. We talk sizes too small. We used to call them the mediums. He's wearing a small, but he should be wearing a medium or large. They're that tight where you can barely fit in it or move around. That's a common thing that you see in the world. And it's revealing everything that the man has. It's the same, and we're going to talk about the women here in a moment, but I'm kind of picking on the men. That's the same thing. That could be the same situation. You're looking at the lower body. You know, you could wear tight pants. There was a time, Wrangler jeans. Now, I wore Wrangler jeans or Levi's probably till the time I was in junior high or high school. That was just what we bought. But the reason a lot of people wear Wrangler jeans is because they are very tight. And men would buy them actually super tight so that they could show themselves off. You talk about short shorts. That's becoming a thing for men. That, it doesn't matter about showing our nakedness. It's okay. We can wear short shorts, and for all of a sudden, it's a funny thing. Back in the 90s, men's shorts probably went down to almost their ankles, or halfway down their calf and shin. Now shorts just keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter. You look at most golf shorts, and I have a problem with this. I have really long legs, you might know, but it's hard to find shorts that go down to your knee. It's hard to find shorts that whenever you go to sit down, are they riding up? Are they showing your nakedness? That's the problem. You know, we talked about going up on the altar and exposing your nakedness. That can happen. Sagging pants or dropping down to where you can see your drawers underneath. And I know that's probably not a common thing around here, but that happens in the world around us. These are all things that we need to be thinking of. Think of outfits. I said short or tight pants, bicycle shorts, wrestling uniforms. There's probably track outfits that they have today that are tight fitting. They're so tight, there's nothing to them. There's no loose clothing or anything on them. Let's go over to the woman now. And I tried to keep these lists about the same. I tried my best, and I didn't make all this list up. This is why I have a wife. She helps write some of these sermons. She gave me lists of things. You know, a woman, their upper body, having a low-cut shirt. You know, a low-cut shirt, a V-neck, or one that's drooping really, really low, that's exposing things you're not supposed to be exposing. Oftentimes, wear a shirt underneath it. My wife, whenever she buys a dress, she usually buys a shirt almost right there with it sometimes, because oftentimes more and more dresses and blouses come even further and further down. You think of bathing suit tops, same as like a gymnastics outfit. A lot of bathing, there's not any different than a bra. They're the same thing. Shirts that are too short. It's a funny story, and this kind of goes with the lower party with the jeans. My grandmother, one Christmas, was given a list from some of my sisters. They were called Gap jeans, and they were telling them exactly what she needed to buy for Christmas and everything. And I remember her saying, "I'm not buying those Gap jeans. They don't need to be having a gap from their pants to their shirt, and my grandma thought it was part of the jeans. And we had to explain that's not what it is, Grandma, it's just a brand. But that's a common term, is having short shirts, crop tops, whatever you want to call them, where your abdomen's showing, and it's going all the way up to where you can see the bottom part of your bra and everything else. That's a common fashion trend today. Tight-fit shirts and dresses that are revealing. Open-back shirts and dresses. It's kind of the same for men. You know, you go to work out and you're wearing, you may have a sports bra underneath, but you could also have a muscle-type t-shirt that you might as well have nothing on. You can still see right through it whenever you're going to lift weights or anything. And I think that's where people of the world, that common culture that it's okay as long as we're covering ourselves up with a bra or underwear, it doesn't really matter what we have on top. And that is progressing into the church. That type of attitude and that change in standard. Spaghetti string tops or no cover of the shoulder at all. We just talked about that tunic coming from the shoulder all the way to the knees and the ankles. This is often seen even within people of the church. See-through tops that cover, but they still see the outline of a woman's body. I actually looked this up. I was doing some research trying to see has this kind of changed? There was a film festival that actually recently on their red carpet, and we know people on the red carpet wear some pretty bad things, but they didn't want to have any more nudity or anything like that was shown. And so this one lady dressed up in a sheer outline with sequins, like basically little jewels all over, and they let her go through because it was a sheer something to cover her up. And it revealed everything. It didn't change. And that's where people are trying to change that she still was going against the rules. And it was brought out in that article. You look at the lower body, and I'm running out of time. I told Tony I'd go fast today. I'm not. Lower body. Tight-fit pants that reveal a woman's figure. Leggings, yoga pants. This is a big, big, big thing now today. Wearing under your shirt or skirt or dresses or long, you could wear a long shirt. If you want to wear some leggings or something, as long as you got a shirt or a dress that goes to your knees, I think you're fine there. But when that's all you have, and it's revealing to the body, it's the same thing. There's little to the imagination. You think about short shorts, Daisy Dukes, and now the booty shorts. Basically, they're revealing the entire thigh and even further up. And I bring these up, and I know it sounds like, well, that's stuff of the world. Basketball shorts, volleyball shorts, people that are so-called Christians are wearing these things, revealing themselves, revealing their nakedness, and their shame should be shown. It should be seen. There's my daughter doesn't play volleyball or anything, but you look at the volleyball shorts that people wear. They're very, very tight. Bathing suit bottoms. They're no different than underwear or even some types of lingerie anymore. Dresses that ride up, especially when sitting, just like the men's shorts. Are we being careful whenever we go to sit down? See-through skirts that maybe you have a slip on, but you can still see through that skirt. Jeans with holes in places that are revealing. And I think that's a big fashion trend is, well, we have jeans on, but we'll just put a bunch of holes all over the place. And we'll put holes as far up as, way up by the hips and waist. Well, what is that? What's that trying to reveal? It's showing your nakedness still. Slits in skirts going all the way up to the hip. It might be a long skirt that goes all the way or a dress that goes to your ankles. But if you have a slit that goes all the way to your hip, you're still showing yourself when you're walking. And this doesn't just pertain to the adults. How are we training our children? Are we teaching them, to dress the right way? I think that's one of the most humbling, and I know some parents get real embarrassed whenever their kids may say to some random person out in the world, hey, you're naked. Well, that kid's been taught, first of all. And maybe that adult now is going to learn. and be embarrassed by what that kid said. I've heard Hunter say it multiple times whenever he was younger. He doesn't say it as often anymore. He knows. But as a little kid, they'll say those things because they know. Train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. This is a very difficult thing if you have young daughters. I've had to have this fight with Emerson multiple times. Either rolling up her shorts because she's trying to fit in with all the other girls at school. Other people at school calling her, "You're wearing boy shorts," because she's wearing shorts that go to her knees. You look at her out on the soccer field. I'm sure Tinley and Eiley, y'all are playing soccer. Those three stand out compared to the rest of them girls on the soccer field because they have shorts to their knees. And you parents should be proud of that. And it's not a fun fight. Whenever you're having to console your daughter on why somebody's telling her that she has boy shorts on. And then whenever she looks around in the church and she sees other Christians that she looks up to that aren't wearing shorts or skirts or dresses in the right manner, and I have to go home and explain to her that that is wrong. You think about it, we continue on. What about formal occasions? Does a wedding exclude these situations? Do we stop being a Christian at a wedding? You think about wedding dresses. Oftentimes they're cut very low. They don't cover the shoulders. They're very short in some cases. They don't cover the back. We think about our church clothes. Are we wearing clothing that's covering everything? Are we wearing clothes that are there to worship God, or are we wearing t-shirts and just whatever we find in the floor? We're coming to worship God. We are coming to give respect. It's just not an everyday type of thing that we wear normal clothes. Some people dress better for their jobs or school than they do when they come to worship. We're coming to give a memorial service, and it should be treated as such. We're running out of time, and I conclude that, like we discussed in 1 Timothy and 1 Peter, our dress should start with our attitude, inwardly. What's our attitude in being a Christian first? In most occasions, our dress, like I said, is the first thing the world sees. And it should reflect that of a Christian. Maybe you haven't been professing that outward appearance as one that follows Christ. You can make that change today. We see there in Colossians chapter 3, Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to get into that in our Ephesians class, about putting off that old man, putting on the new man. And you can do that in baptism. We read in Romans chapter 6, 3 and 4 that we can put off that old man in death. And that happens in baptism. And we can walk as a new man today. You can do that today. You can do that today also with your dress. Throw away those old things that you can't wear that's inappropriate. You can make that change in your life today. We bid you to come forward now as we stand and sing the invitation song.